I'm very excited to introduce Ben. Now, when Ben submitted his talk, we love the idea of here we have a data-driven individual from a data-driven organization who's going to help show you how to leverage this data to better manage your human risk. Ben, with that said, you're on. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that introduction, Lance. And I just want to start by saying thanks for the organizers. Events like these are just a lot of work to put together. And so far, this summit has just been really fantastic. I've really enjoyed participating in it. Thanks to Masha Sadova for getting me to submit. And thanks for Alex for helping me shape these slides. So I am really excited to be here. And I looked at this title and I looked at the program and I was most excited because I think everybody could read this title and be on my side. So if you're at the SANS Security Awareness Summit, I think you've kind of already bought into this title. And so given that kind of raises the question of exactly who am I and what am I doing here if you already agree with what I'm going to say. So I'm Ben Edwards. I'm a senior data scientist at an organization called Cyentia, which I'll tell you about in a little bit. I live in the Midwest in the Twin Cities. This is one of my favorite pieces of public art in the Twin Cities, a giant blue chicken. And I want to share with you, just as a way for us to kind of get to know each other, a little bit of a dark secret. And that is, in fact, that I am very much a data person. I am not a security person. Data is my first love. And even so much so that kind of this classic joke from one of my favorite shows, Futurama, where two humans are trying to infiltrate a robot planet, and they're given a test. They're asked, which would you most prefer, a puppy, a pretty flower from your sweetie, or in fact, a large, well-formatted data file? Honestly, when I first saw this, I was like, well, the answer is C. I don't even understand why this is a joke. As someone who deals with really poorly formatted data all day, if somebody could give me a CSV with some nice escape characters in there, that would be fantastic. And I would love that. So this wasn't even a joke to me. So what is the data person doing at a security summit? Like, how did I get into security if data is my first love? Well, it's a long winding trail. I'm not going to give you the whole thing, but this is sort of a map of my life. But it went through me going through engineering school, getting interested in computation and math, and getting interested in complex systems and human behavior. And so after that, I kind of turned away from mathematics and tried to get into sociology. I went to grad school for sociology for a few years to study human behavior. It actually sort of turned out to be a personal dead end for me. I don't think sociology is a dead end. It just happened to be for me at that time. And I got me turned back towards computer science, where I met a wonderful advisor, Stephanie Forrest. And she helped show me that security is in fact like one of the most complex systems. And it's not really a technical thing. It's something that we need to think about human behavior because there are humans in the loop. I got to do a really cool dissertation where I started treating security as a complex system, looking at things like botnet takedowns and if they work, and seeing how data breaches evolve over time. It was fantastic, and that's what got me interested in security. So even as someone who loves computation and loves data, security was a natural fit because you guys have interesting problems, and there's interesting data to be had. After that, I had a kind of short jaunt at IBM for a while before I landed at the Cyentia Institute. And just to tell you about who they are a little bit, if you don't know. So the Cyentia Institute is awesome. There are 6 of us, so it's not a huge company. But what we do can best be described as kind of thought leadership for hire. We work with various companies in the security domain to help them understand their data, understand their customers, and give them leadership out in the world to say this is where we should go in security. So we get to publish like independent reports. These are all free, by the way. Just kind of Google them around or go on our website. The Information Risk Insight Study. This is a study of data breaches over the last few years, looking at their frequency and size. So we get to ask, like what's the typical size of a data breach and how can people address them? We've done stuff like looking at patch timing and vulnerability management with Ken Security. We've looked at optimal application development strategies with Veracode, and even things like, oops, wrong arrow button. Even things like what makes a successful security program with Cisco. So I, as a data person and just in hog heaven, I get to work with these fantastic companies that have fantastic data that they give to us for analysis. And so as a data person, when I start thinking about human security, I think, well, I need some evidence. So is cybersecurity really a human problem? And I think about, like as a data person, I need some facts, some experiments, some measurements that tell me if that's true. And so as kind of an academic, the first thing I do is go to the literature. And what's better literature than the DBIR, the kind of canonical report that comes out in our industry. And of course, there are a ton of things in the DBIR that support this. And, we've talked to, we heard, Masha and Alex talk on the panel yesterday, something like 85% of incidents in the most recent DBIR have a human in the loop. There are other reports out there. The egress insider data breach says, 95% of incidents are involved in insider in some way. And that's a pretty broad category, right? Some people make mistakes. But the point is, I don't expect you to read all these stats. There is plenty of evidence to support that, humans are in the loop. Humans are part of human security. Okay. So given that that's the case, how do we measure human risk? So if we know that it's a problem, if we know that humans in the loop are causing these incidents, the first question we should ask is how do we measure it? And this is where we really get exciting things, because we got to partner with Elevate Security. And what they were kind enough to do is turn over a bunch of their data, and I think like all of their data, to Cyentia and asked, hey, see what you can find, look at this, and let's see what kind of hypotheses we can test, what we can do, and we'll write a report and help inform people on what they can do for in security management, how they can manage the human attack surface. So this consisted of about 4.5 million user actions. And by user actions, I mean things like, did they click a phishing email? Did they report that phishing email? Did they download malware? And we'll get to some of the other ones here in a second. But over about 144,000 users, over 2,000 organizational departments. And I think departments are kind of an interesting level of analysis, and I'll get to that in a little bit, because that's where management happens, right? A department is where kind of a manager has micro control over the employees. They have personal relationships that they can nudge employees in correct directions. And so I think that's kind of an important place to measure things. And we'll see in a little bit, a tough place to actually get progress done. We're going to measure human risk. We have all this data. What exactly should we measure? So we're going to measure bad things and good things. So bad behaviors and good behaviors, and see how they correlate. So bad things we're going to measure. Phishing, both real and simulated. So we send these simulated emails. Of course, users are going to get malicious ones as well. Malware, we're going to ask, are users downloading and executing malware? We've got customers have instrumentation on machines to see when that kind of thing happens. And then like kind of more esoteric things like clean desk violations. So are you leaving proprietary material out on the desk? Are you not walking away from your terminal while it's unlocked? Things like that, things that could harm the company, but are not quite those like direct technical aspects. But of course, we also want to measure the good. We want to see how people are doing. So things like, are they using a password manager? Is that installed on their machine? And are they actively using it? Do they have secure passwords? Do they have a secure password for the password manager? So those are all things we'd want to check and correlate with some of the other behaviors. Training. This is how we often address human security. We go for training. Are people completing it on time? Do they have a high completion rate? Those kinds of things. Are they reporting those simulated phishing emails once they get them? And the last one I want to talk about here is gamification. So this is kind of letting people know through benchmarks how they're doing, how their department's doing, how other users are doing, and helping them kind of nudge them in the right direction to say like, hey, everybody in your department's completed the training, have you? So Elevate helps facilitate these kinds of emails, these kinds of messages, and we want to measure, does this help? Does this help as much as training? Okay, so we've got all the measures down. The next question is, like, what's the answer? And I think here is a not secret. I led off with the dark secret, but we're gonna end with something, or we're gonna go to something that's not a secret right now, which is users are gonna click. Unfortunately, if you look at all the simulated phishing emails that was in the data set we had, about 6% of them result in a user clicking on something. Now, what's interesting about this from a data person is as you kind of aggregate up, about 40% of users are going to click eventually. So it's not like it's 6% of users doing all the clicking. It's that it's kind of a random process, and then eventually somebody's going to click. So about 40% of users, if you send out enough simulation emails, are going to click at least once. About 2/3 of departments, so once you aggregate up to that bigger level, kind of at the department level, somebody's going to click. And no org is immune to it. So if you send out these simulation emails, at least somebody in your org is going to click, at least in our data. And I think this is probably, jives with most people's experiences, that most people are going to click something. Let's do some more not a secrets. Malware is the same thing. About 6% of people download it. 31% of people of departments are going to, and again, 100% of orgs are going to, at some point, somebody's going to get a piece of malware on their machine that's going to be executed, or maybe just downloaded, but that may be enough. So we can measure kind of these broad strokes of various types of things. But one question that I want to ask is, like, who is most prone to these kinds of bad or good actions? So on the left-hand side, we measured a good action, which is the percent of users that have a password manager, and we broke it down by different employee types. So we can look at contractors versus employees versus managers. And what we can see is actually managers have 30%, the highest password manager use rate. And that's great, right? Managers are more likely to have access to critical systems. And so we want them to have strong passwords, and password managers facilitate that. Contractors, of course, we want them to use password managers, but maybe that's not where the most risk lies for something like a password stuffing attack. Now, kind of on the flip side, if we look at something like materials violations, we see the opposite trend. And by the opposite, I see, it's still a positive kind of correlation as we go up the organizational ladder, but rather the bad is going up. Managers and employees are about 2%. There's not a statistically significant difference here of having that materials violation. So leaving that computer open, having proprietary material out on the desk. Now, this is interesting because they probably are the ones who have access to it. And it's unlikely you're going to have a contractor who has access to that proprietary information. And so they have a really low likelihood. So one thing is kind of locating this risk within employees, locating where this bad behavior is good. So you know where to nudge, you know where to apply the appropriate intervention to help get these people on track. So we can look at kind of different employee types. But one thing that was interesting to us is does the organizational structure matter? So in particular, like where an employee is located within the organizational structure, does that affect their human risk? And it turns out it does. I hope there are some executives in the audience today who are going to look at this, because what we did is we took each organization and we kind of spread it out from top to bottom, and we put the CEOs and the C-suite at the top, and we put everybody else, in layers down. And so that horizontal axis is actually the layers of the organization going down from the top, the 0%, down to the bottom of the org chart, 100%. And then we looked at the employees in each of those kind of percentage buckets, how many of them had malware events. And I think, again, executives are going to be happy to hear that top of the org chart had really low rates of downloading and executing malware. This may be because they're managing their systems well, they're very security aware, maybe they're too busy to go to dodgy websites and download things they shouldn't, but they do really well. And you can see kind of that risk increases as you move down the org chart. And then towards the bottom is where we get that 10% of employees. So if you're focused on trying to prevent employees from getting infected, one of the things you may want to do is focus on those lower level employees, help them understand the risks, and help them get the tools in place so they can avoid those kinds of things. So this is the kind of the depth of the organization. And this last one's a little strange, and this is getting into where things get messy. We wanted to look at kind of the breadth of organizations and see if that makes a difference. So here we're measuring at the department level. So each of the dots here is a department. And the size of the dot is roughly the size of the department. And across the horizontal, we have what we're calling the department branching factor. It's just the number of employees per manager. And then the vertical axis is the percentage of the phishing emails in that department that were clicked. And the main point of this graph is it's very messy. So I've gone ahead and done a statistical model and drawn a line through it, and there's a slight negative correlation that seems to indicate that kind of less employees per manager have higher click rates. But I think the main takeaway here is it's really messy. So there is some kind of difference based on that organization, but we're going to get a lot of variance. But it may help you to identify for your organization. Of course, we're across a lot of organizations here. May help you identify which departments may need help. Is this might be one of those factors. It's kind of the shape of the organization. So how do we address this? We've identified human risk in several places. We've measured it. We looked at kind of where it's located. So how do we address it? And I think we're at a SANS event, so I think everybody knows the answer, and that answer is training. So we ask our employees to sit through in-person training, watch some videos, do interactive trainings, and we send them simulated phishing emails. And then again, as a data person, as somebody who likes evidence, I want to know is this working? So if I go to the literature, if I go to the SANS website and look at the SANS phishing awareness training, I'll find out that, yeah, it seems to work. If we look from that 30% basic phishing assessment all the way through the advanced assessment, we get a 28% increase in the click rate for those simulation emails. So that seems pretty great. That seems pretty great. With one caveat, I'm going to do a little math problem. And I apologize for those of you who really hate math, but I promise it's simple, and I'll walk you through all the steps. This is a word problem, so think back to your elementary school days. Assume you're a small business owner, and you have a small business with 228 employees. You're worried about phishing, and so you assign them all the advanced SANS training, and they work through all of it. And they do a great job. They finish on time, and they get down to where we think they all have that 2% click rate chance. So what's the chance in the next week when you send out all the simulation emails after everybody's completed their training? What's the chance that at least one employee clicks that phishing email? Does anybody have a guess? I'll watch the Slack and see if anybody has a good guess. If anybody remembers their their probability. 100%. That's pretty close. And I kind of contrived the number of employees here to be an interesting answer. So we can take 1 minus 0.02. That's the probability that they don't click. It's about 98%. We raise that to the 228th, and those of you who knew exponentiation means it's about 99%. So it's almost certain that somebody is going to click those phishing simulation emails. And this is essentially what we saw before, right? As you send out more and more of these, eventually it's a numbers game. Somebody's going to click. Okay, so but does training help? How close can it get us to zero? Let's look at our data as opposed to the SANS data. And what we found is pretty interesting. So on the left-hand side, we have the number of times a user has completed a training. And the vertical axis is the average click rate for the users. And we can see for the 0 on the far left, that's no training. And the 1, they're about the same. It's about a 10% click rate. But by the second and third time they've completed the training, we actually see that decline. Now, I think what's really interesting about this is the 4th and 5th training, the percentage, the click rate actually goes up. And I don't have a great explanation. I have some good hypotheses, but I don't have a lot of evidence for why this is happening. There's one hypothesis is that kind of clicky users get the training. So if you do a lot of clicking, you're going to be assigned more training. Another possible answer is that these kind of users are getting inured to the training, and they're just saying, you know what, I don't care anymore. And so they're kind of ignoring what they're learning. So the same thing can be said for the number of simulation emails. We can see as you send out more and more, the click rate goes down to a little below 5%, but it stays pretty steady. You're not gonna get to 0. So if we look at that aggregate level at the department level, again, we see the same thing. In fact, on the left, you'll notice the horizontal here is % of users in the department who completed the training versus the vertical, and there's just no correlation. We can draw a straight flat line across that, and it just says nothing. And so I think this is that aggregate level. You send out enough, people are going to click. On the right-hand side, we maybe see a little negative correlation, but really I think there are these two groups. This is the number of simulated phishing emails sent per employee per year. So on the far side, you have companies that are sending out 1 a month. On the left side, maybe occasionally. And we see there's a lot of variance in the kind of 1 to 4 range. And then as it smooths out at the bottom, we get to that lower rate. Knowing this process, my guess is the left side is a lot of noise. The right side is more consistent because we have more data. And that model that we've built, even though statistically significant, is actually pretty flat. Okay, so why isn't this working? And this is going to get to kind of some of the interesting stuff that or the most interesting things that we did. So what these charts are clocks. They're 24-hour clocks. They have midnight at the top and noon at the bottom. And they represent the times that the emails are sent out. So for example, simulated phishing is sent out about 12 a.m. or 1 a.m. most of the time, sometimes 9 or 10 a.m. first thing in the morning. And then if we look at when users actually click those, when they do, it's when they first get to work, right? They get to work, they check their email. If they're going to click a phishing email, they do. And then when do they get reported? About the same time. Okay, if we were to compare this to real phishing emails, because we had some of those, what do you think it looks like? And we'll see if anybody has the immediate answer, the immediate and hopefully leading answer in the chat. Anybody? I see typing. All right, I'm just going to go on. The answer is, of course, there's a slight delay in the clicking, so I get ahead of myself. The answer is, of course, real phishing gets delivered around the clock. And in fact, we see a lot of it delivered kind of in the mid to late afternoon. And although we have a pretty small sample of the number of clicks, most of the clicking happens in that evening. So this is a mismatch between when people are sending out their simulation emails and when actual real phishing emails are getting sent out. And you notice reporting is actually, they're reporting it when they get it. So you might want to evaluate if you've got a mitigation technique like simulation. You want to send these simulation emails to get people used to it. What you want to do is you want to mimic what we know in the real world. And what we know in the real world is, of course, phishing is sent around the clock. Okay, what else can we do besides training? And how improve training once we figured out when to send those simulated phishing emails out. One is provide benchmarks. I talked about this gamification. So Elevate facilitates these things called pulse emails, where they send out and say, your department's doing great, your organization's doing great, hey, but you're behind on training. Here's those motivation things. And so we wanted to see at the department level, and again, very messy, a lot of variance in this data, but here we actually see a kind of a negative slope, whereas for training, we didn't. So this may be an indication that for some people, pulse emails do a little bit of work, whereas the training may do less. And so this is one tool that you can provide to users that kind of hopefully push them. And I think, Dr. Fogg talked about that in the last session is here's how you nudge people. You get them you build that community and that culture. Another thing is you want to provide tools. So we looked at users with an active password manager versus ones without an active password manager and whether they downloaded malware or not. The ones with an active password manager, less than 0.5% had a malware incident. Those that didn't have one, it's like almost 7.5. I'm not saying this is causal. I'm not saying if you force all your users to install password managers that they're all gonna, suddenly not have malware. But I'm saying if you build the security culture, if you help people understand why password managers work, and you get them on board with an active password manager, they may be more cautious when they're surfing the web. They may be more cautious when they're downloading things. And so you want to provide them the security tools, help them understand the security tools, and hopefully you'll get better outcomes. The last thing I want to say is you want to keep measuring. We measured a lot of stuff. And the point of this chart is to show you how complex human security is. So around the outside of this wheel are essentially all the things that we could measure about human security from that data. We draw lines in between them to say, like, there's a correlation here or not. The correlation is blue or red, whether it's positive or negative. And the point is, it's a really tangled web. Like, I don't expect you to kind of like pick apart each line here, but to understand that, use of password affects whether they're completing their training on time. Downloading malware may be positively correlated with not using an MFA for their password manager. So it's this really, really complicated web of things. And you really want to start measuring to understand for your organization how these things are connected. So what do we do? Where do we go from here? I'm not going to reveal the slide quite yet. As I said, I was not, in the SANS community, and as I've learned over the course of the summit, it's been really great, particularly about this, security awareness maturity model. And I'm proud to say that great minds think alike, because I wrote these slides before I saw that model. And I think, measuring human risk, that's kind of at that top or maybe in the middle, where we're building those security awareness programs as we're building up. And the first thing we want to do is measure and see what's happening in your organization and know where your risk is. The next thing is evaluate your methodologies. And I think this kind of gets to that top layer of the security awareness model where you've got mitigations, you're sending them out. Are they working? You have an opportunity if you're just starting a security awareness program, if you're just starting to send simulated phishing emails, to be able to say, I'm going to send one before user has a training and after, and see if it's actually that training has actually made a difference. And if you've got ongoing programs, you might want to see if they work, see if they match reality. So if you're sending out simulated phishing emails, every month at 1 a.m. on the third Thursday, maybe alter that. Maybe look at see if there's a different way to approach that. I've had a lot of fun. I hope you guys have learned something. I hope the data was interesting because data is usually just interesting to us nerds. And I'm happy to take any questions and talk. And I'll be available in the Slack for as long as anybody wants to shout at me. So thanks for that.
All right, let's see here. Ben, I think we've got time maybe just for one question.
Sure.
One of the questions I see here is the overlaid C-suite results. CEOs don't click links because often they're too busy. Maybe it's the PAs that are or not clicking the links.
Totally possible. One thing that's interesting about that is the level is based on reporting. So if it's like a PA, and they're a direct report to the CEO, they would probably be in that 10% possible level. So even those PAs probably are doing better because they are at the top of the org chart. But it isn't an interesting hypothesis, is they're not reading emails. They're just clicking links, or they're doing stuff. Whatever CEOs do, I don't know. I've never been up at that level.
All right, Ben. Hey, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up and get ready to introduce our next speaker. But folks, I'm assuming you can meet Ben in the chat channel.